SWAT teams aren't really a new idea, but police officers in tanks and riot gear making small drug raids? That's just one example of what some are calling the militarization of American police, and it's happening across the country, from small cities to big cities. The Rise of the Warrior Cop by Radley Balko is a new book investigating the issue, and he joins us on set to discuss modern policing. So Radley, what prompted you to write this book? How did you get started?
Wow, let's see.
Take us back.
Back in 2006, I was working as a policy analyst at the Cato Institute, and I was covering the drug war. And I kept reading these articles about these botched drug raids where the police would get the wrong house or something catastrophic could happen during the drug raid that wasn't expected. And I just remember at the tail end of every one of these articles, there would be a police spokesman who would say, this is an isolated incident, this is nothing to worry about, this never happens. You read enough stories about isolated incidents and you start to wonder how isolated they actually are. So I ended up writing a paper for Cato and continued to follow this issue over the years, reported on a lot of individual cases, and it was really actually the crackdowns on the Occupy movement a couple summers ago that started to push this issue back into the spotlight a little bit again, and at some point there was some interest in a book from publishers, and here we are.
Soldiers and police officers both have license to use force. Where do you draw the distinction between the two, and how are we sort of setting up this militarization of the police force?
Yeah, well, the two jobs couldn't be different, or couldn't be any more different. Sorry, and unfortunately, I think politicians make this mistake of, both professions carry guns, both can use force, so they're interchangeable, and that's why you see sort of politicians declaring war on drugs, crime, terrorism, because there's this idea that we're not serious about a problem until we declare war on it, until we start using war tactics to get rid of the problem. But they have two very different missions. I mean, the military's job is basically to annihilate a foreign enemy. It's to put it bluntly, to kill people and break things. I mean, that's what the military does well. Although the military is starting to do some policing too, but that's a whole other debate.
Right, that's interesting. The military is moving into policing, and the police are moving more into a military.
Yeah, I mean, overseas policing, yeah. And a police officer's job is to protect our rights. It's to protect and serve, or to keep the peace. These are two very, very different missions, and we've done a pretty good job of keeping soldiers from enforcing the law domestically, and this country has a tradition of being very averse to that. And in fact, you see the most reverence for that principle in the military, which is a healthy thing. But what I argue in the book is that we've sort of done a poor job of guarding our flanks, to borrow some military terminology, and our cops have become more like soldiers. I'm not anti-SWAT team. I think there's an appropriate use for them, and that's when you're using violence to diffuse an already violent situation, so hostage takings, or a violent escaped fugitive, or a bank robbery. My problem, the criticism is when they're used to enforce the drug laws, for example, and they're breaking into people's homes in the middle of the night to enforce, the pot law, marijuana prohibition, or I talk in the book about they're using SWAT teams to break up poker games. They're using them to enforce regulatory laws in one case, raiding bars where they think there's underage drinking going on. I mean, these are completely inappropriate uses for this.
And it's one of those things where it's like, well, now we have the SWAT, so we might as well use it, and it's not what it's deemed for.